vegetable farm, which is in its third season.
You may begin.
It's hard for me to listen to talk about me because I don't think of myself in this doctoral student. It's not really that awesome. It's a lot of hard work. But I do just want to start by thanking you all for being here. I definitely want to thank Dawn for helping me with this. I would not have been able to get it done without her. I'm very new to learning about cooperatives, and so I definitely focus more on the social justice aspect of the autonomy and the agency, and so I'm hoping that Dawn and I'm sure many of you can help when it comes to talking more in detail about the specific examples of cooperatives that do these sorts of things. So with that, we do have a lot of handouts for you. I don't know if we'll hand them out as we go or at the end if you can grab what you want. But there is a handout that talks about definitions for understanding anti-oppression theory, and a few of the ones that I wanted to pick out was talking about power. Power is a relational term. I'm just going to read from here. A relationship between human beings in a specific historical, economic, and social setting. It must be exercised to be visible, and then it gives different definitions of power. I have strings that make me feel like there are bugs crawling on me. Okay. So having legitimate access to systems sanctioned by the authority of the state, the ability to define reality and to convince other people that it is their definition, ownership and control of the major resources of a state and the capacity to make and enforce decisions based on that ownership. Access to those individuals, social groups, class, and institutions which own and control the resources of the state. And so I think that it's really important when we talk about power. I was a part of a Black Power organization called All Black Everything. And normally when we say the term Black Power, of course we get a lot of opposition from lots of different people. And it's sort of, I think that people sort of take it as a negative thing, and it's totally not a negative thing. It's in the sense of Black people have had power taken from them and they're not able to exercise the power that they inherently already own. And so when we say Black Power, we're just trying to assert that, yes, we do have this agency and autonomy over ourselves as beings, as a group, as a nation, and so it's not racist in any way. That's what we get as well sometimes. And so I just wanted to point that out because I think that that's really important to the topic as far as how cooperatives can help with Black Power, basically. And of course this also extends to other groups, but I focus on African Americans in the United States, so I talk about that often. So with that, I will start with the social justice part. I think maybe there we go. Okay, I'm like, it's still on, so thank you though. So just a quick little background. So obviously I'm a doctoral student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I hope to do my dissertation on the feasibility of starting a co-op in Milwaukee. Maybe specifically I'll speak on Harambe if any of you are from Milwaukee and know the community well. And there are people who are already talking about doing that. And so that's why I'm starting to get more into this, and I was really interested in doing this workshop. Okay. Let me make sure I don't have this. So I wanted to start off with some statistics about some social justice issues in Milwaukee, which does focus on African Americans, but of course this can extend to the Hispanic community, the LGBT community, and obviously anyone who's in poverty. So when it comes to education, the graduation rate for African Americans in Milwaukee public school system is 44%. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. So there's not a large percentage of African Americans graduating from high school, but of the ones that do, what does their curriculum look like? Do they go on to college? Can they go on to finish college? And not that college is the end-all be-all, but what is the history that they're learning? If one knows about the curriculum at MPS, or mostly across the United States, their curriculum does not include their history any further than maybe a chapter or two about slavery, and that's it. And so they're not learning about themselves as a people. They're not learning about the power that they've had throughout history. And so they get, I think, a very stunted education. You can also look at the demographic of the teachers versus the demographic of the students. So MPS is majority African American, but the teachers are majority white. And that's a problem because of cultural issues, and we could teach a whole workshop on that. So that's all I'll say about that. When it comes to employment, and I got that statistic from MPS's website. When it comes to employment, only 44.7% of African Americans are employed in Milwaukee, and 77.4% of whites are employed. And so this is a huge problem, because if you don't have employment, obviously you don't have income, and there's income inequality. But again, that's just the tip of the iceberg. How do we get higher employment numbers is obviously through education. And for most people in the United States, and I think that when we talk about worker cooperatives, it becomes evident that when you don't have any ownership over your own labor, basically. And so that also becomes a problem. I got those statistics from UWM's website. There's a student, his last name is Levine, I can't remember his first name, but he's doing work on employment in Milwaukee. So for housing, and I got this statistic from the same paper, African Americans own houses at half the rates that whites do. And this is really important because of wealth. A lot of wealth is in your home, and wealth is part of what helps you get more education, part of what helps you have that savings for when the recession goes, like we just experienced. And do you have that backup of income to be able to help you sustain until the economy comes back up? And then food access, 65% of low-income families have no access to healthy food. Healthy food here was defined as fresh produce. I think it was mostly defined as fresh produce, wheat, grains, non-processed foods, basically. And so obviously a lot of the people that are in those, and this is in Milwaukee, so a lot of the people that are in this 65% are African Americans, the majority of them are. And so I think that when we start with this framework of looking at the state of African Americans in Milwaukee, it's obviously very bleak, and I'm sure a lot of us are into social justice issues and things like that. We're aware of these things. And so I'm going to hand it off to my partner Dawn to talk about cooperatives a little bit, and then we'll get into mixing the two together.
So I'm going to pass around some, I'm sure most of folks are familiar with cooperative principles, but it helps to have them. Just this is from Revolutionize Co-op. I don't know, on the back of it also has food sovereignty principles, but when I talk about cooperatives in general, it's like people have always worked cooperatively, and so cooperative businesses don't have ownership over that concept, but it's actually more like codifying it into a business structure of what does it mean to organize a business around cooperation. And so these cooperative principles are what people are using to connect over. So these are the same principles that people's books use, right? These are the same principles that Just Coffee in the last session used. These are the things that as we bond around cooperatives, this is what we bond over essentially. And so there's hugely these principles have been inspired by social justice. Like number 4, autonomy and independence. Number 2, democratic member control. Number 1, open ownership, non-discrimination, and then we have the cooperation among cooperatives, building a cooperative movement, number 6, principle 6, and then concern for the community. So these are very different ideas than like when you're going to go to a business school and learn about starting your own business. It's not going to look anything like this. It's going to be a lot more driven by money. That's it. There's your bottom line. It's money. So in definition, there's a couple different ways to look at what is the difference between a consumer co-op, a worker co-op, producer co-op. So there's two ways of kind of categorizing co-ops. One is who are the members. There's the primary and secondary. A primary membership would be like you directly are receiving the services. It's a consumer co-op. You're directly buying the goods. That's going to be you're putting your money in a credit union. Or it's like you're a worker owner in a worker co-op. It's very primary. Secondary is going to be when you have a co-op that's formed by a bunch of different independent businesses. And that's going to look like a lot of agricultural co-ops in the state of Wisconsin. If folks are familiar with like Organic Valley is one, like there's a bunch of different dairy farms and they all pool their milk together and then they market the milk together. So the secondary co-ops really focus on either marketing a product or a supply. This could also be like if the 5 of us all have dairy farms and we want to purchase feed. We have separate farms. We can all purchase feed together and we can form a co-op to purchase so that we can lower what we're getting. So this is actually true. Grocery co-ops have a larger co-op that a lot of work with called NCGA, and that's where NCGA lobbies buys in mass amounts, and then the grocery co-ops then can compete with other stores. So that's one way to define it. Does everyone follow that? Primary or secondary? Another way of looking at it is going to be the producer, the worker, and the consumer. Producer really deals with that secondary co-op model. It's like supply and marketing. So it's like independent business, independent ownership coming together. Their first grocery store in England in like the early 1900s. So they developed some of almost the very similar principles. Like there were a couple on there that have fallen on the wayside over the years. Like you should only pay in cash. Like we don't use cash as anymore. It's just a form of currency. So, and one other thing I wanted to throw out there, I'm like all over the place, local and national examples. So there's also very, very large co-ops that also can be problematic in some ways. So Land O'Lakes is a co-op, Ocean Spray is a co-op. And then you have very, very small ones like neighborhood child care co-ops. That there's a lot of ones you might not know exist right in your community. And then I mentioned this at the last one, but I looking at the history of co-ops, the fact that it seems like we're actually in a third wave of co-ops. So like in the early 1900s when the principles kind of were introduced, it became this big thing in the early 1900s, and then in the Depression a lot of co-ops that started went out of business. And then in the 60s and 70s a lot of co-ops came back into the social fabric, and then a lot of went out of business during the recession. And now I feel like there's like a huge upswing of co-ops again. So I feel like we're kind of in a historical moment for co-ops, which is hard. It's like, how do you define that? You're in it, like, what is it? Where are we going?
Awesome. So I also wanted to, we can mostly see all of those. I wanted to introduce, if people aren't aware, I wanted to introduce you to the 7 principles of Kwanzaa. Kwanzaa is a holiday that most people say, oh, it's made up. All holidays are made up by someone. But Maulana Karinga, he's a professor at the University, he's in California, not Southern California. He's in California either way, he's a professor over there. And he's one of the fathers of the idea of Afrocentricity and looking at things from an Afrocentric worldview. And so he created this holiday that is celebrated. It starts December 26th and goes into January 1st. And each day there's a principle. And there's a candle holder that's sort of like the menorah that has the 7 candles on it. You light a candle for each day. And so the first day is Umoja, which means unity. The second day is Kuji Chagalia, that's how you pronounce that, which means self-determination. Ujima is collective work and responsibility. Ujama or Ujama, you'll hear people say it both ways, is cooperative economics. Nia is purpose. Kaumba is creativity, which I like to call innovation. Sometimes people have these high level and low level words, and I think they're both basically the same thing. And then I typoed that. That's supposed to say Imani. Just take the A off of the end, I'm sorry. And that means faith. Who's seen the 7 principles of Kwanzaa before? Okay, good, awesome. So I think that 3 of the principles that are really important and that speak directly to cooperatives are the Kujichagulia, Ujamaa, and Ujima, because Ujamaa is cooperative economics. And this is, and he didn't make up the terms, he took the terms from African culture that already existed, and so cooperative economics was already a part of African history, or African culture, I should say. And so I get really excited when I think about cooperatives because this is something that basically we would be re-remembering from our past and bringing into our future to make it work for modern day times. And so that's really the part that's really exciting to me about it, is that we're not doing this new thing that has all of a sudden come about. This is something that we've been doing for a very long time. We've just been removed from it, and so now we're coming back to it.
So that would be Sankofa.
Yes, Sankofa, return and go get it, which is one of my favorite of the Adinkra symbols, and we'll talk a little bit about that later too. There's a organization that we have, a Sankofa study circle, which people probably wouldn't call it a co-op because there's no ownership or anything, but everyone has a say in what we study and that sort of thing. So we'll talk about that. And so I just wanted to introduce these right away. I'm not going to go to the next slide because that's going forward for what we need. But the reason that I wanted to pick out those 3 is because the self-determination part is really important to me. So when we talk about social justice issues a lot, it's like, okay, well, what can we do to help the Black community? And how can, you talk about graduation rates. Well, how can we have African American graduation rates equal to white graduation rates? How can we have Black home ownership equal to white home ownership? And I don't like to have this sort of bar and you have to meet the bar comparison that totally takes away your self-determination, your autonomy, your agency, because you're trying to work to be just like somebody else. But instead to say, we're looking at our surroundings are what we want them to be, in what ways can we as a community, and we can also collaborate with other communities, but that we have control over what goes on in our neighborhoods and things like that, in our schools. If we could have a worker cooperative in Milwaukee that was comprised of a large percentage of African Americans, that'd be awesome. But that's part of what really attracts me to, and like you said, I know that a lot of the principles of cooperatives are social justice based anyway, but sort of taking it from a different perspective and looking at how oppressed groups, and I think it's a little different when you talk about just purely economic freedom versus freedom of education, freedom of, your ability to govern yourself, period, and to have your own culture and things like that. And so I think we're going, to examples. I think we're going to go through worker cooperatives, housing cooperatives, school, and food. Those 4, and just give some examples of some of them that exist, and how the cooperative model helps to give agency to people through those. So the first one is worker cooperatives, and that one is Dawn.
Okay, before I get into it, I remembered I brought cookies for people, and I'm going to start passing them around. If you look on the bottom of the bag, it says what kind of cookie it is. So I'm just going to pass some this way. So, the cookie break. And there's more if that doesn't make the rounds all the way. Hi. So
Chairs in the back.
there's some more chairs back there. So how many folks in the room are is anybody here a part of a worker co-op? If you are, really raise your hand. Okay.
Years ago I was. I worked at Union Cab.
Union Cab.
Yeah.
What about you?
Hard times.
Hard Times, Minneapolis Cafe. Public House. What's Public House? Okay. So as we were starting to talk about so we're tying together these ideals, like social justice ideals and cooperative ideals. Worker co-ops really focus, in my perspective, they focus a lot on what it means to have a good job. What it means to have work that you're engaged in and work that is, you have control over and you have that self-agency and that autonomy. And so it's also really, it really strikes at a lot of the heart of class and where people are disempowered in the class system and disempowered economically. So that might not mean that you're making some high wages. I can imagine that that's not true for a lot of these worker co-ops. Like these are some of the examples of ones in Madison, which is where I live. Equal Exchange is actually out of Massachusetts. Is a fair trade coffee chocolate company. Interpreters Co-op, they do interpretation and translation services. And Community Pharmacy is downtown. They do like natural health as well as pharmaceuticals. So they have a pharmacist. Just Coffee, coffee company, and Union Cab Services, Nature's Bakery. So we have a lot of different kinds of different kind of services as well as products. A lot of folks who get co-ops off the ground really are inspired often by these similar social justice ideals. In the origin stories, Just Coffee talked about their rootedness in Latin American solidarity and social justice around Latin American solidarity. Same with Equal Exchange. That's like very much the root of where they got off the ground. Someone described it to me like this: coffee is where the money is, so go where the money is and redistribute it. So that's like a model that I think sometimes co-ops look at what businesses are actually rolling in. Like if we all had gas stations, like what would that look like? What would cooperative gas? We were just talking about this. It changes the conversation because money as the bottom line becomes completely different.
Jewish have their own gas station actually here, 6 hours from here.
There and where is that?
It's 6 hours from here. Their land. They have a casino. They have a factory, and they have a gas station.
There's a number of a couple of different grocery co-ops that have been also partnered with gas stations, so they're grocery and gas. Which is an interesting concept, but thank you for sharing that too. There's a lot of different pieces of the worker co-op model where I think it kind of strikes at the heart of a lot of the hierarchical kinds of work structures. I just read on Facebook that the Harvard Business School, there's somebody who's writing a book about comparing the slave owners, that with modern day management, like the tactics used in slavery and times of slavery that have become our modern management. And so to me that was like duh, but at the same time like yes, of course, which is like why a lot of people are resisting in their workplaces and looking to have that looking to not be disempowered by the thing. We're making decisions democratically. We might not all like each other, but we're committed to working through these things as a co-op. And this is obviously the ideal. We all know that that's not a perfect thing, but it's that control. And then the board of the worker co-ops are also made up of the people who own it. One real quick thing from Equal Exchange, a little anecdote. They are a pretty large worker co-op, so I don't know the exact number. I know that there's at least 100 worker owners. They have some really interesting bylaws. So in their bylaws it says if the business is ever sold, all of the money will be donated to a nonprofit. So there's absolutely no carrot to dangle for the workers to sell the business that they're building. That's a huge piece of that that keeps people committed to it. Another one is that the top paid employee can never make more than like 3 times like the lowest paid employee or something. So they have a cap. on that. And then in their governance structure, they have a board of nine folks, and 6 of them have to be non-management. So that also kind of tips it back into this balance. Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say this is union campus?
This is equal exchange.
Equal exchange.
Mhm. And from my work with Equal Exchange too, people who are part of that, I mean, it's a company that's selling products, selling coffee, selling chocolate, but every employee that I've met or every worker owner that I've met is like very incredibly passionate about social justice. It's like, I don't know how much they're getting paid, but they're definitely committed to changing international trade via fair trade models. So that's like very much driving the passion for their work in my anecdotal experience. Pretty much, but.
Awesome. And so the next one is housing cooperatives, and I'm really excited about housing cooperatives because I know one of the limitations to cooperatives is that you still need capital, and I really look at a housing cooperative as a way to start building that capital. And so, sorry. I think that most people know in this room, it kind of tells about how cooperatives work, but just really quickly, so when I was looking this up, it seemed like you can't really see it, but there are 2 types of housing cooperatives, equity and non-equity. The equity where all of the members own the actual property themselves, and so they have a purchase agreement where they have access to their dwelling, and then the non-equity is where they don't own the property, but they own the company that owns the property, and so they also have more of a lease agreement with the organization versus a purchase agreement where they own the actual property. And so, like I said, with building wealth, I think that the housing cooperative is really exciting because, and I can just anecdotally talk about with All Black Everything, the organization that I was a part of, one of our plans was to start a susu. Has anyone heard of a susu before by that name? Well, you know what it is, just not by that name. So a susu is where you have a certain amount of people and each person puts a particular amount into a pot, let's say you do it monthly, so we all decide to put $10 in the pot every month. Well, the first month he would get the money, the second month you would get all the money, the third month, the next person would get all the money. And this is a practice that has been done in Africa for a very long time to help people get what they need if they want to start a business or they have a family tragedy, anything like that they can use the money for. And the way we set our susu up was to put this money in a pot to buy property. And then once we bought that property, people could move in. Their rent would be much, much cheaper than, them renting from someone normally. And then that extra money that they're saving, they can in turn put back in the pot. So now we're saving at a higher rate. And then you keep going from there. You buy another property and you keep going. So that was our goal. I can't say that we've gotten very far yet, but that was the goal. And so I think that that part of it is really, really exciting, and because then you can help build that capital for whatever other cooperatives you wish to start. And so I was looking at the Madison Community Cooperative. Who's familiar with that? A few people? Okay. I thought that I was looking at their model online, and it reminded me of the Mbangi, which is from the Congo. And Mbangi is a political institution, more or less, but it's really just a way of life. And so the Mbangi itself is like the overarching, you might think of it as like a board of directors or something like that. And then the Kanda, that's K-N-D-A on there. The Kanda is the household. And so in the Madison Community Cooperative, they have a number of housing units that they own. And the board must be comprised of people from each of the houses that they have. And that sort of reminded me of the Kanda in the Mbangi, because the Kanda is the household. And so you make decisions within your family unit, mother, father, and that's whoever your parents are, and children, and you make decisions on what you want. Then within that one household of all the people that live in that house, you all make decisions, you elect representatives to go to the board of directors, and then you have the board of directors. And the Mbagi and the Kanda is the same thing. And then they also have committees, like a finance committee, building fund committee, that sort of thing. And the Mbongi has the same. You can, and they don't call them committees, but you can initiate basically the equivalent of that. And so that's part of that remembering, you know what I mean, the African history that we've already had. We've already been doing these things, but here we see it again in a more modern context. And the other thing that I was really interested in too is, so All Black Everything, I already talked about our Susu, but I have a group of friends. We call their house the Mad Real World House. I don't know if anyone watched The Real World, dating myself, but they're a group of friends where one person bought the house and they all live together in the house. They each have a room, obviously, and so it might not be this legally identified cooperative, but they are living collectively and cooperatively. They share meals and everything like that. So they might not know about all of these fancy cooperative models, but they're still doing the best that they know how to make it with what they have. And I think that that's just as important as talking about these larger models that we see sometimes, because it reminds me of epistemologies and what ways of knowing are valued over other ways of knowing. And so no, there's not this particular formulaic way of doing a cooperative, but they're still doing it, and you know what I mean, in their own little way. And so I think that that's really awesome. And then there's also the National Association of Housing Cooperatives. That's like the national entity of, and so I was looking at how they have training so that you can learn about housing cooperatives. And do you want to jump in? You look like you, okay. Look like you had something, but the training and everything that they provide for people to be able to start their own co-ops, to get, what's the word that I'm looking for? I'm not a very good communicator, so I don't know why I do public speaking all the time, but it's the word that I'm looking for. But basically they help you have access to other people who are already doing, there's a word for that, I don't know what it is, so that you can get like some best practices and things like that. So that was what I had with the housing cooperatives. So.
Okay, so talking about food co-ops, what I wanted to kind of point out is that, kind of bouncing off of what you had just said, of like the cooperative model doesn't have to look like, we have cooperative business and cooperative business law, and that has some kind of codifications of the business structure, but a lot of them either start out as like mishmash kind of collective projects, or like dissolve into kind of being sometimes like more of a mishmash, and they're part of the same, like they're part of a spectrum, I think. And so I put on this the buying clubs, and how there's a spectrum of a lot of buying clubs that have become grocery stores, and the concepts of buying clubs, and taking that as a base for folks who are living in communities or neighborhoods where there aren't grocery stores, and there's not really, it doesn't seem like that's going to be something that's going to be on the horizon anytime soon. The idea of starting a buying club can be a lot more to wrap one's head around than a grocery store. So, and so looking at that as being the model is like a sharing model, buying in bulk, sharing and cutting the costs that way, and then that's a way of learning how to collectively organize with people. So the Lily Street Co-op started off that way. A lot of places have. One of the things that food co-ops specifically, and I guess I should specify, I'm more going to lean towards talking about grocery co-ops, but there are other models around the food system that make sense to talk about cooperation, like the chain of supply, like cooperatives that supply cooperatives that supply cooperatives, whether that's like coffee, chocolate, etc. Internationally. It can also mean local, like Organic Valley is based out of Viroqua, Wisconsin. That's a local, I mean, it's across the U.S., but other ways of supplying via a cooperative chain. And then there's also models that look a lot like co-ops, like the CSA model for farms, so community supported agriculture. You sign up for a share in the beginning of the season. You get a share of vegetables and maybe fruit or other things. You know, that the community supported model is gaining a lot of traction. Like I'm seeing like community supported bakeries and like I think I've seen, is it true that there's like beer now, like community supported beer that you can buy, and like all these like, ideas of like you pay up front because that gives the producers the money to work with, so that, and then they supply you throughout the season or the year. So that's another kind of, it's not exactly the co-op kind of thing, but it's in that spectrum of cooperative and collective engagement. So looking at how can food co-ops build local food systems. When a co-op will prioritize sourcing things locally and from small businesses, it's going to look really different than the big box kinds of grocery stores of getting things off of big trucks from wherever this food is grown, wherever it's cheapest. You have to actually make a pretty season or even before the season. The produce folks sit down with farmers and they have farmer meetings and they say, okay, we're gonna buy our winter squash from you this year. So then the farmer says, how much are you gonna order? And then they tell them, and then they say, okay, we're gonna plant this much. And then the co-op has like, you're our primary buyer that we're primarily, if something happens, we're gonna have a second and a third like backup, whether we need more, whether you have a crop failure or whatever, so we can ensure that we're still getting products locally. They have all these arrangements with all these different farmers. Those things have taken years and years to develop. The other thing about this model is that, so in the grocery world, you're looking at margins. How much are you marking up your product so that you can pay for all of the overhead costs? Well, if we're buying from local farmers, we're wanting to make sure that we're giving them fair prices, which is going to mean it's going to, first of all, the price to consumers is going to be higher, but how can we do our best as a co-op to like minimize that? So what happens is we put the margins lower on local products and higher on like packaged and other such products that come from wherever, that are lesser quality, are non-local, are made by big corporations with just natural labels slapped on them. So it's kind of this like transference of money, so that we're slowly trying to build a local economy, and then that becomes the top factor of when people approach us with they want to sell their product. Local and small are like the main criteria. Like if your product is local and small, you're going to be at the top of the list. If it's like corporate and whatever, crappy ingredient, whatever, it's going to be a lot further to the bottom. Not to say that there's not have to be a bit of a balancing act of like affordability alongside like this development. So as a tool in a larger movement, I think that's really important. I put food eaters, food workers, and food privileges. Well, we're all eaters. Let's get that on the table. So we all have that in common. We all are invested in that, and we're invested in the food that we put in our bodies. And there's this weird statistic, which is, I'm not sure the source of it, but I could find it. In the U.S., we pay less than 10% of our income on food. Less than 10%. This is on average. This is like I think it's average. I don't think it's median. I think it's average. Now, some of us in the room are probably like, whoa, I pay way more than that on food. Okay, well, so that could be true. But that statistic is the lowest in any country. Not like rich or poor. We pay the lowest amount percentage-wise on food. So that says something. It says we expect food to be cheap. Well, if we expect food to be cheap, and we have a system that's subsidizing a lot of these mass things, corn, grains, etc., it's falsely lowering the price of food so that we think food is cheap when it's really actually very expensive to produce. Our government's putting money into the food system to these things. So that when you get back to that kind of like argument about organic food being really expensive, organic food is generally like the real cost of food. So that's just the price transfers directly to the consumer, because organics are generally not subsidized, very very small percentage. So I talk about that because in the grocery co-op in Willie Street, where we do gear more towards like organic, local, natural types of foods, but that's part of a larger, broader fabric of a food movement, and so I wrote food eaters, so we all have interest in the food that we put in. So when we're lowering the cost of the food, we're also lowering the quality of the environments in which people create food. So there's this whole chain of people that are bringing us our food, and food workers are like notoriously exploited, from farm workers to food service to factory workers. So we have this system that's kind of premised on exploitation, and a lot of like the lowest paying jobs, it's like if you look at the 10 lowest paying jobs, like a third of them are in the food industry, something like that. You know? So when you look at a co-op model, you're also looking at like just the end piece of it. So a lot of people shop at a co-op and they're like, I'm doing, you know, it's great. You're doing great. You're doing that step. That's really positive, and it's really awesome that there's a co-op that's paying workers fair wages and that's providing good jobs. Now we need to turn that back into the rest of the food system and like lift up every piece of that food system and use our like collect a lot of workshops, a lot more conversation. But I just want to throw that out there really fast, and that there is. Slowly I'm seeing a little bit more energy and attention going into this in terms of definitely trying to drive that in Madison, but like there's a co-op in Ithaca, New York, which kind of went through this process where they were looking at, we want to make our co-op accessible, and we want to make it accessible in all kinds of ways, and people use a lot of the terms like, everyone talks about diversity and they use the word diversity, and I often argue most places that we exist in are diverse places, and that like diversity is often a cover up for like racial and ethnic diversity, and so like it's kind of like a cover up word or a cover up concept, and so like let's name these things, let's put them on the table, and let's talk about what's not working and like where things are not accessible. So looking at financial accessibility as well as cultural accessibility in these environments, and kind of poking at that and problem solving and critiquing side by side. So this co-op in New York, it's called Green Star, and they decided to like jump into this conversation, and they're like, there's a lot of white folks, predominantly white board of directors, predominantly a lot of white workers, and serving a predominantly white consumers, and they went into this and they said, we don't know what we're doing wrong, and we don't know how to change this, but we're going to commit to doing something. And so in the process, they've kind of been moving towards a path of making the co-op, changing the co-op really fundamentally. And it's a slow process, but some of the key points are like looking at their hiring practices, looking at who's running for the board and why are they running for the board, and what is the interest, and who's shopping, and is it financial accessibility that's really the issue? So creating some sort of financial things in place to make food more affordable, and just really taking that kind of critique on and saying we really need to do a lot of work to examine ourselves, and we're going to do this in a collective way. So that's kind of like a next step, but I'm seeing that happening as well, and little by little I want to see more of it. So.
And the last thing is school cooperatives, and I'll kind of wrap this up quickly so that we can have some discussion among us. But how I said before, it's about more than just the graduation rates. Talk about teacher demographic versus students, the curriculum, also the school to prison pipeline. I don't know how that turned out there, but the school to prison pipeline is very real in a sense of schools basically preparing students to get ready for jail instead of a job and life after school, and training workers versus training free thinkers to creatively come up with their own ways that they want to support themselves in their life. And so from what I was seeing, there's a teacher-owned cooperative and parent-owned cooperatives. I know that there's a school in Milwaukee that is a parent-owned cooperative. It might be parents and teachers. Michelle from the Riverwest Co-op, I know that her children go there. But those two different models, and the teacher-owned cooperative is more of a workers cooperative than it is a schooling cooperative. But those were the two different types of ones that I found, and like I said, I'm sure we're all knowledgeable about co-ops, and so I'll move on from that. But Sankofa Study Circle is the it's the entity that I was talking about, part of All Black Everything, and they study African-centered books, and everyone has a say in which book they choose, and they divide up the chapters, and people come, everyone reads a different chapter, and then you come and you give your summary on what happens. And so, I still think that that's very interesting. It's really fascinating in the sense of, these larger models versus the ways that people just make things work within their communities. And part of what Sankofa Study Circle is community education. So the children come, the elders come, everyone comes, everyone has a voice. The children get chapters and they have to read them. They have to give their, synopsis of the chapter that they read. And I thought this was really interesting too, looking at the housing cooperative that's in Madison, because they had some of their rules are like that children under 12 eat free, that children have a voice, that they're respected as well, that they're not left to the side or just told what they're going to do, or they're not important in any sort of way. And so we really tried to do that with Sankofa Study Circles, make the children present, that it was all for them. And I think that for me, as far as how cooperatives can revolutionize the movement, I was thinking of all the different ways that I personally, as social justice advocate, primarily for African Americans, but for everyone as well, how do we think of these ways in which we want to build up our communities? And I think that basically cooperatives are the answer to that question, right? So there's a lot of different ways that people are working in the communities, different after school programs and food pantries and things like that. But I really think that the cooperative model is the best way to go about liberation and go about talking about social justice in the African American community, because that places, again, the autonomy, the agency in their own hands versus these outside entities coming in trying to fix things up. And I was reminded of a Malcolm X quote where he said, "Only a fool would send their child to the enemy to be taught." And when I think of that, I think of the enemy as more the government and these corporations that are taking over these schools. We have a lot of private-owned schools right now. And so why would we send our children to a place that we know they're not getting a good education? We know that they're not graduating at the rates that they should be, and we know that the information that they're getting is not only false or half true and things like that, but that the school is also designed in a way to, these zero tolerance policies and things like that, that the school is designed to have your child fail, basically. And so I really think that school cooperative is a way, obviously, to combat that. I think I'm going to leave it there because we don't have very much time. And so there are some limitations, but I think that we kind of talked about them as we went along. And so I won't talk about that, but I would like to open up the floor to any questions or comments, anecdotal stories that anyone would like to share.
This is for her. What's your name again?
Dawn.
Dawn. This is a comment pertaining to, you were saying about you get projects from more the local thing. Let me give you more of a broad thing. When you have a company, you have the main source, the corporation of the company. Then you have distribution plants and you have managing companies. Each one of them has a percentage. It adds on a percent to each place. So let me give you an example about grocery store. There's a famous grocery store in Wisconsin called Woodman's. Woodman's grocery store, they're kind of co-op-ish because they get it from only the source, but they have no middleman. And that is what they do. They get from the super source, but they try not to get no middleman or in between that will add on to the money. So that will more clarification what you were talking about.
Definitely. Well, we've been talking about just a little bit, like when you cooperate in that cooperative chain too, like when you're working with other grocery, like if you have common interests, it gives you that kind of, can we get a cooperative warehouse? Because we don't buy at the volume that like somewhere place like Woodman's that's like 15 stores. We don't buy at that volume, so we're subject to the prices. I mean, there's a lot of issues with just distribution, warehousing. Oh God, we could talk about that for a long time. But yeah, money is going out in every piece of that. I thank you for bringing that up.
I was curious at your comment that during depressions, co-ops go out of being there. Any particular reason why?
No, they actually do better during depression.
Yeah, that's what
Really? That's so in the beginning, what I've learned from kind of the study that I've done is like that a lot of things started during the Depression, or a lot of things started previous to the Depression.
No,
and went
a lot of
down.
things started in the depression. A lot of co-ops
During
started
the
in
Depression?
1930s.
Okay. Okay.
And
Well,
even now, the co-ops are doing financially better than their counterparts, conventional corporations.
That's during the alcohol prohibition you're talking, or during the phase of time.
1930s.
Yes, that's alcohol prohibition.
Yeah, I was curious about that because I think, in my mind, logically, a co-op would be able to withstand the,
okay.
the downturn.
Maybe, so then maybe my history is, well, it sounds like my history is incorrect, and I need to learn some more, which thank you for bringing that up. I think then also the communist scare during like so that was it,
During
40s,
the 50s.
so that's when someone under
became more conventional.
Okay, so during that time, it was like, if you were part of the co-op, you were branded communist, or like, that's when co-ops kind of started moving away from like overt political kind of frameworks into like nonpartisan. I would thank you. I need to do more research. I appreciate it.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. You mentioned something about law, so is pretty much all the law needed to manage or governs co-ops pretty much a state level issue, and is it mature enough so that like as far as like legal entities and transaction and contract, that's all there, or is there a lot to be done?
I'm not a law person, to be honest, but
We have the best co-op law in the country, and it goes back to 1912. Back during the progressive era of our state, the state legislature actually sent a small team to Europe to glean the very best co-op laws in Germany, in France, in Italy, in England, and they brought that back and they crafted our co-op law.
It was because I stay on booth, and so I'm with Malele.
She's both. She has both.
She has both of them? Okay. But they've both been talking about the possibility after the Dollar Tree on North Avenue, if anyone's heard about that debacle. After that, she was very much into starting a co-op over there. And so I don't really have an update because I've let her know that I'm very interested in doing this and in helping in any sort of way. And obviously I think my first step would be to poll the neighborhood and see if they want the co-op. But did you have an update?
Well, another group that's kind of working on that is the Healthy Food Access Group.
Mm-hmm.
I know she seems really interested.
Yeah, yeah. So people are talking about it, but I don't think there's been a huge, step that they're talking about it at the moment. So. And so I thank everyone for coming. Unfortunately, we are out of time.